Welcome to video 3 of Gamer to Game Developer Series 2. In this video, we're going to implement the Unity Master Server. So our objectives for this video are simple. I'll just briefly discuss the Unity Master Server and then go through some of the changes in the multiplayer script. So currently what we have is a private server. We host a private server. In my case, so I'm setting it up at home, and my computer is sitting behind a router. Now, for anyone to be able to connect to me, they need to know what my IP address is, so I have to manually inform them of that IP address. So if I have port forwarding set up, I can do it that way, or I can use Hamachi and I'll then have a Hamachi IP address. And that's how our players can connect to us. So it's a manual process. They need to receive the IP address, and once they have it, they have to enter it in, and then they can connect to us. To get away from that manual process, we need to host a public server, and that's where the Unity Master Server comes in. So we still host a server, but now it registers itself with the master server. The master server keeps a list of all the public games, all the public servers available for this game type, and any client wanting to connect to a public server will first contact the master server, retrieve that list of public servers available, and then, depending on how we've written the code, the client can then pick one of those public servers to join to. So you might be asking now, how does our computer and this client's computer know how to contact the master server? Well, the Unity Master Server, it has a default IP address. It's a static public IP address, and it's already saved in Unity. So we can actually change it. We can change that IP address because we are supposed to set up our own master server. This master server that Unity provides is just a test master server for testing out our games before we release them. And it can be down every now and then. So if you're following this tutorial and you're trying to connect to the master server, like host a public game or connect to a public game, and you're unable to, then know that it's because the master server, Unity's test master server, is down for some reason. And it can be down for a couple of days at a time. Anyway, I'll briefly go over network address translation. So I have a very basic understanding of it, but our public server at home, it doesn't have a public IP address. It has a private IP address. It's sitting behind a router, and we could have other computers in our network at home as well. So when it's communicating to this master server, which does have a public IP address, how is this master server's communication supposed to get back to our computer? It can't use that private IP address. It needs a public IP address. So to the best of my understanding, the router will set up a temporary public IP address and port, which is then used to relay information back to our computer. And the same thing is happening between the client and our server as well, because we're all sitting behind these routers. Now, if we had a computer that had a public IP address, then we wouldn't need to use network address translation on our end, but the player would still need to use it since they're sitting behind this router. So I would recommend doing a Google search for what is NAT punch-through and go through some of the results here, but I found the fourth one was a pretty good explanation, well, one that I could understand easier than the other ones. Alright, so I'll move on. I'll just take a brief moment to give you an overview of what's happened to the multiplayer script. So there's been 4 window, configurations added to our multiplayer script. So since we need to be able to host a public server or connect to a public server, I've added 4 more window configurations. The first one now is a new window configuration. Just remember that these are all the same window. Everything 1 to 3, it's actually all the same window. I'm using the same window in code, but I'm just changing the contents. That's all I'm doing. So that's why I'm saying window configuration. Right, so if I want to set up a server, then I'm given two options. I can host a public server or a private server, and that's it. That's where I've said I've added a new window for hosting a public server. And for connecting to servers, once again, I have a choice now. I can connect to a private server or a public server, and there's a new window for actually joining a public server. Alright, so enough of this talking. Let's actually get into Unity and have a look at, well, see what it looks like. Alright, I've plugged in the new multiplayer script for this video and it's ready to run, so I'll just go ahead and run it. And I've already built a copy of the game as well, so I'll just use one to set up a server. I'll use the Unity editor as my server. So I just, as you see there, I have here a set up a server button and a set up a public server button, and once I click on that, I can give the server a name and launch and register the public server. Very simple. Okay, so it's done. Jumping over to this other window here, I can now connect to a server, and I have two options, the public and private. The private, of course, is as usual the old thing, and this public is the new one. Right, so it's searching for a public server, and it can see two. I have another open on another computer, so that's test server 2 is on another computer. I can enter a player name, and whichever server I want to join, I just click on it. I can also refresh the server list, so I just hit the refresh button and it'll just refresh it. And of course I can go back, but I don't want to go back. I'll just quickly join a server, and as you can see, it's just like before. Doesn't look anything different at all. So, but we are actually on a public server now. Okay, so let me just disconnect and just leave it at that. Okay, so now I'm going to just run through the code. I will just close this down as well. Now let's go through the code, and I'll just step you through what I've changed in the multiplayer script. Okay, I'll go through the script now, and I'll scroll down to where I have used in master server implementation. These are all the new variables that I've put in for implementing the master server, and the one that's really important here is this one, private string game name type. It's really important that you do change this to something unique. Because for my game name, well, my game type is this GTGD S2 test, and every server that gets registered with the master server will be for this game type, and every player launching my applications will be looking for this game type from the master server. So if you're making a different game, then you need to put a different name. Actually, even if it's the same thing as me, you still need to put a different name. And if you didn't, and other viewers didn't as well, then what will happen is that you'll start to see a lot of public servers that might have nothing to do with you, and perhaps maybe someone's like making a racing game and someone else is making an FPS and they're using the same game type. Well, yeah, I guess that'll be interesting what might happen. Anyhow, so continuing on to the start function, I've just added a little bit of more code. In here I've just added another style called bold style. I use that for basically the connecting to a public server window configuration. It's used in there. You'll see it in a little bit anyway. And then I have here master server dot request host list game name type, and then I ping the master server, and the master server has a default IP address. Now the funny thing is that I have to first request host list in order for this IP address to basically become recognized. If you did a debug.log before master server request host list, if you did debug.log and you did master server.ip address, you'd get a result 0.0.0.0, which is wrong. That's not the master server IP address. So I don't know why I just had to do that, and then I can actually ping the master server, and I need from that ping, I want to get the latency, the time that it took for the ping, and I'm going to use that later on. You'll see in a bit what I use it for. Then I have here two new variables for defining the window height and width. Now, this is because when we have that list of public servers, the window really needs to be bigger. So what I've done here is to simply just capture the default values so that they can be restored when we're not looking at that window configuration. Alright, so I'll just change this view here to default, move that text to the left side, and I'll bring up this game here, and I guess I'll go through past the start function, go to the void connect window. Alright, so this one you'll recognize from before. It doesn't look any different. I do have a new bunch of conditions here, a new bunch of booleans here because we have public server possibilities now. Anyway, here you can see it's the same thing. Set up a server button. You can see the code right here. Connect to server button. All that stuff is still here, still the same. So let's go ahead and set up a server. So I'll click on this, and that'll set I want to set up a server is true. So here's the relevant code. I'll just bring that back up. And you can see here, set up a public server, set up a private server, or go back. Those are the three buttons. So depending on which one I click, I'll have different booleans being activated or deactivated. So let's say I want to set up a public server. Oh, something I did want to mention was that the function we're looking at is connect window, and this function is run inside of onGUI. So basically it's drawing the window, the GUI. Alright, let me just go back down to I want to set up a public server is true. Alright, so let's talk about that. So I'll click this, set up a public server, and here you go. You can see that label, enter a name for your server, then here the server name, that's what's written inside the text field, and of course I have here a GUI button, get GUI layout to dot button, launch and register public server, and it has a height, and I've just given it this variable to define the height of that button. And yeah, nothing surprising here. I just simply save the server name once I click, if someone clicks on that button, and this old business, this old bit of code of tell everyone what the winning score criteria is. That's from series 1, old stuff. And then here, let's actually initialize the network. So once, well, not the network, initialize the server. So once the server is initialized, then I say master server dot register host. And oh, there's something I should point out here. When we initialize the server, look here, this this bit here is for whether or not we use NAT, the network address translation, and I've said here whatever it isn't. So if we don't have a public address, then use the NAT punch through, and that's exactly what we're doing. We don't have a public address, and it is going to use NAT. Alright, so continuing on, yep, so with the master server we register our host, our server with it. So we give it the game name type. You saw there, that's what I was telling you that you need to change for your even if you're learning, etc. If you're just learning and following along, you should change that as well, so you don't have any mix-up with other viewers as well. And just the server name here as well, which is what will appear for the player when they're connecting. They can see that server name and click on it to join. And here this empty field is just a comment that you can put in. Alright, so continuing on, I'll move out of there. Let's say, yeah, it's pretty obvious. I mean, if I click this launch and register public server, I'll simply create a server. So I'll go back now, and I'll go back again, and I'll move on to, say, connect to a server. So let's go to that instead. So I'll skip that. If I want to set up a private server, there's nothing different there from before. So I'll go to I want to connect to a server. You can see there straight away the three buttons: connect to a public server, connect to a private server, and go back. And you can see here that if the one I'm interested in obviously is connect to a public server, and I make the connection window bigger. So if I click that button, what'll happen, let me just click it, you can see the whole window just became bigger. So that's what that function is about. So let me just go down to it. Let me just Control F, go to it. There we go. That's make connection window bigger. And all I do is I just change the connection window height and width, and this is being drawn in on GUI. Alright. And later on, if I want to make the connection window default size, I do that. I do that when the player has actually connected to the game. So I think that's down below. Just give me a moment. So here we go, on connected to server. You see there I have make connection window default size. So it only does that if the player actually connects. There's also another condition too. Let me just go back up. Alright. And then I have here, I start a coroutine, talk to master server. Alright, so let's go down to that coroutine. I'll Control F that, so I can easily just go over to it. Not quite yet. Let me go again. Alright, that's our coroutine. And what we're going to do now, so let me go back here to the window. And let me just go back. So when I click this button, I've started that coroutine. You see here it was searching. Let me just go back again. You see here it's searching for public servers. So that's part of the coroutine, is partly responsible for that. And you remember up above that I pinged the master server? Well, you're about to see why that is. First of all, I set this host data to is equal to new host data 0, and what this is I'm just setting this host data array back to an empty condition. So if I just scroll up, I'll just Control F this actually. So this variable, Control F. Oh, there's a lot of them. Actually, instead I'll just scroll up, that'll be easier. And there we go, it's private host data, and I've declared an array there. It's of the type host data. So let's go back right down. And you'll see where it's used in just a moment. And then what I do here with the master server class is I clear the host list so that the previously, whatever was searched previously is just removed, because you see here I have a refresh button and I was going back and clicking on that button again, searching for public server. So you obviously don't want old information being kept, you need to remove it. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Then I request from the master server, I do a request host list for this particular game name type, well, this game type. Now that request host list to talk to the master server and request that it gives me a list of the public servers available, it takes time. It takes, the amount of time it takes is basically that the latency to the master server. So that's why I pinged the master server. I wanted to know how long it takes to talk to the master server, and then I've just added on. So I've done master server ping.time. It's in milliseconds, so I divided it by 100 to turn it into because this wait for seconds will be using seconds. So if I had 200, say 240 millisecond value here, just plain up, it would then treat it as 240 seconds. I'd be waiting for minutes for this function to complete. So I of course convert that to seconds by dividing by 100. So dividing the milliseconds, which are like, maybe when I last checked it was like 200 or 250 millisecond latency, divided by 100, it became 2.5 plus a fudge factor of 0.1. You might want to increase that, or up to you anyway, depending on results. I haven't been able to test, if there were like many servers, how long it would take. So I haven't been able to do that. Obviously, you'd need many computers for that. Okay, and then after that, so now in that host data array, I copy over basically all that whatever list of servers that I gathered from the master server. So after the request host list, this is where you use master server.poll host list. So you capture that in the host data variable. And now we can make use of the information inside host data. And I just have here if there was nothing. So if there was nothing in host data after all of this, it means there are no public servers. So I set this variable, this boolean no public servers, to true. And if I just search for that, and I'll go up to where it's used, again. Alright, so here if the condition is false, then we see the message searching for public servers. We're just going down. Now, let's have a look. Oh, so it's only used, yeah, it's only used in the false condition, because if it's true, I don't need to use it again. When we go through this code here, you'll see it better. But I just have an else statement, so I don't actually need to say, else if that boolean is true. I just say else, and you'll see that in a moment, don't worry. So going back down here, continuing on, then I have another list here. Now this is a different set of pinging. This is, I want to get, the latency of each of the public servers. That what you see normally in games, etc. So what I do here, I have a list. I've just used a list for this rather than an array. I clear that list and I trim the excess, indexes off it. So it's taken right back down to an empty list with one item, I guess. Well, I haven't checked that. Maybe it's one item. But anyway, the list is trimmed off, so that way we don't, when we iterate, there aren't excess pieces inside that list for no reason. And then I guess continuing on for each of the public servers now. So now assuming that the host data.length is not equal to 0, then let's iterate through that host data array and add that ping basically. So server ping list. So this server ping list, which is for capturing pings, just add a new ping. Now let me just go up and show you that variable itself. Server ping list, you can see it's of the type ping. There's an actual type, a class called ping, and it takes time to ping. Actually, it just doesn't happen like that, because you actually some sort of a message or something is being sent to that public server, and then something is sent back. So when we store these pings into this list, we then need to check if it is done before trying to display an actual latency, which we're going to go up above and have a look at. Alright, so you've seen this coroutine now and what's inside of it. Basically what I've used the coroutine for is to request that host list from the master server. So get that list of public servers and then put it into an array so that I can manipulate that information, and then at the same time I pinged each of those public servers in that host data array. Okay, so let's go back up now, and I'll just close this. Oh, if I was smart, I would have just used Control F on that coroutine name and just gone up to where I needed to, instead of trawling through this long script. Okay, so once we had clicked that button, connect to a public server, these conditions, these events will have happened, and we'll move on to here that if I want to connect to a public server is true, and you'll see here this result. So going down, let's go have a look at it. You can see here the GUI layout.label, enter your player name. That's exactly that right there. There's a text field so that you can type in your player name. You'll see here a GUI layout.box. This dark gray border looking like thing, it's actually just a box with a very small height, and I've just put that so I've added some separation. Let me close the other server. Let me shut it down on this other computer. So I'll shut down that server, and let me refresh this list for you. And you can see here now the message is no public servers found. So that's what it looks like. And you could see here that when we're searching, you'll see this message searching for public servers, and it has that GUI style. So that's when I guess the host data.length is 0. And of course, because of that coroutine, it will be 0 for a bit, because remember, we clear it, then we request that the host list from the master server, and then we wait for a time depending on the master server's ping time. So of course, for a little while, this host.data.length will be 0, and of course this message will appear as you see there. Now once that coroutine is finished, and assuming there's a server, so let me turn that server back on. I'll set up a server on this other computer and refresh this. Then we're going to have this information displayed. So scrolling down a bit and bringing this back up. So you can see here I begin a horizontal. This is for these headers, public servers, players, latency. And then I just simply put in labels for each of those headers, and I end the horizontal. Now I have a scroll view set up here. The reason why you notice, let me just refresh it. Notice how it becomes, there's this gap here. The scroll view causes this space to just get filled up, and obviously if there are more rows than can be displayed in this window, a scroll bar will appear and I can just scroll through the list. So that's where I basically have begun a scroll view right here. Okay, so after that, now let's go through the host data array. So I need to obviously show what's inside of it over here, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. So each of the public servers are being shown as a button. So there's only one I have running at the moment. If, say for example, I just go back to the editor, just run that, set up a public server, launch it, alright, and go back to the code, let's refresh it. And there we go, so we've got 2 rows now, and you can see that each button is showing the server name. And if we clicked on it, these events would happen. First of all, the player name will be checked. It's the same old story from as if we were connecting to a private server. It's nothing different at all. And then here we have, the only thing different is how we do the network.connect. So you'll see here I have network.connect, host data, and whichever one was the one that's clicked. So that's I guess pretty simple. Okay, then we have here in the continuing with this horizontal here, we show the number of players connected, so you can see that here. You'll see here I have host data i.connected players -1 because the server is included as a player, so I just subtract that. So it's now actually only the players, server not included. The host itself is not included. Alright. And I've just grayed out here one for IP. You could just bring that back. There's other options under host data as well. There's other parameters that you could show as well. It's up to you. And after that, then we list the latency. Now you notice here I have here NA, meaning not available. It looks like for computers that are within the same network as me, I can't actually, when I ping them, the ping gets completed, that operation gets completed, but it doesn't retrieve a latency. Nothing comes back. It's just useless, basically. If I actually have an external server set up, then I actually can see a latency. I did try that by just setting up a hotspot with a smartphone and just checking that. So I did try that out with a smartphone, and I did see that I did get a latency. It was very choppy using the 3G connection for that. Anyway, so continuing on, so you'll find that if you do try to connect to a server that's not in your same network, you will see a latency there. And then continuing on, let's have a look. Yeah, so this is the same bit for that latency, and the reason why you see not available. So I have here if server ping list i.is done, if it has been completed, and the latency, the time, is less than or equal to 0. So if it's -1, you're just getting nothing. Basically, it couldn't find any latency. And same if it's 0. I don't think there's anything called a 0 latency. Even if it's connecting to yourself, doesn't make sense. So if that's the case, then just put not available. Also, if this server ping list is never completed, like it pings but it's just not completed for some reason, it's unable to complete it, then once again just put not available. It means that it's just not reachable by that class, the ping class. Yeah, so I can't really explain why that's the case for computers within your own network, but external computers it should work. Alright, so continuing on. Yep, and yeah, as you saw there, if there were no servers, I just have this else statement. So you see I have 3 conditions. That, you know, if it's this condition, then show searching for public servers. If it's this condition where the host data length is not 0, then show all those, each of the hosts, list them in different rows. And finally, if it's none of those conditions, that means there's just no public servers, so just show that message instead. Okay, and you can see here the refresh button now. So if GUI layout.button refresh, and all I do is I set this no public servers boolean to false, and I just start that coroutine again. That's all. That very coroutine we looked at, it just happens all over again. And all of this then just repeats. So it's actually pretty simple. So actually implementation of the master server was not hard at all. It just takes, I guess, somewhat different thinking and a bit more time testing as well. Alright, so I believe that is it. There's actually nothing more to show. I'll just connect it just because I can. No real reason. So I'll just disconnect from there. And that should be it for this video. Let's have a look. Let me just go through it one last time, just in case I've missed anything that I needed to tell you. And it's looking like there's nothing that I actually need to tell you. Let's have a look. Yes, fine. Nah, okay. So we're done with the multiplayer script. And that's it, basically. We now have master server implemented. Of course, as I told you before, it's only a test server, so this is Unity's server for our own testing purposes. You wouldn't actually use it for hosting a for a completed game. If you're going to have a completed game, then you need to set up your own master server, and that's something that we'll need to look at in the future. Alright, so thanks for watching, and see you another time.